Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to our next keynote. We're very pleased to welcome the Maison Parmigiani Fleurier. And for this, I would like to welcome on stage the CEO, Mr. Guido Terreni, Mr. Wei, co-founder of Revolution and The Rake, and Mr. Gary Getz, world-leading watch collector.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to introduce these two gentlemen, Mr. Gary Getz, who I would say is probably one of the most knowledgeable collectors, in addition to being incredibly well-dressed also. And he's going to shed some incredible insight today on calendar systems and why he feels that Parmigiani Fleurier has in fact made such a respectful and genteel nod to the civilization, right, through their calendar watches. And a man that needs no introduction, Mr. Guido Terreni, an absolute legend in the watch industry, and a man that I have to say has created an all-new icon. There's very few icons that have been created in the new millennium, and the Tonda PF is certainly one of those. A watch with extraordinary internal content, incredible nuance, and a beautiful sense of elegance and restrained beauty. So first of all, let me just ask you, gentlemen, how are you? How are you, Guido?
I'm great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Thank you very much. And Gary, how are you, sir?
Fantastic. Wonderful to be in Geneva. Wonderful to be with Guido and with you. And
thank you.
Great fare so far.
Okay, so the topic of conversation is the calendars and the mirror of civilizations. So let's start with a quote from the wonderful Michel Parmigiani, and that calendar systems are a radiology, a capacity to see the past and the way in which civilization has ordered itself through agriculture, through astronomy, and through religion. Gary, maybe I'll start with you, sir. Why are calendar watches and calendar systems such as the Islamic calendar and the Chinese calendar so important?
You know, the interesting thing to me, I mean, I'll take maybe a half a step back even and talk about timekeeping, right? Timekeeping is a human invention, right? If you go out, you know, let's say we go 5,000 light years into space and we look back and we kind of see maybe, you know, the Milky Way as a dot, and you say, what time is it? You know, it's not really. And yet, with the emergence of human life and civilization, people have had to organize themselves somehow, right? And the way they've chosen to do that is through timekeeping, and from the very earliest, you know, water clocks and observations of the moon and sun and celestial bodies to figure out, you know, how to do business, how to form cultural rights, religious rights, the planting of crops, respect for you know, the elders who have passed before them, and every culture has done it differently, right? Before the emergence of you know, our global civilization that we have today, that people in their circumstances chose to measure the passage of long periods of time quite differently, and that's translated to the present time, where there are different ways of thinking about these passages of long periods of time.
Thank you very much, Gary, and very eloquently put, sir. And Mr. Terreni, sir, could you please tell me why are calendar systems such a wonderful reflection of the growth of civilization?
Well, first of all, it's fascinating to observe that the time that has given on us to live on Earth is the same for the whole humanity, okay? That's the only thing that is the same for everyone. And through Michel's work of a monumental work of restoration, Michel developed this understanding of calendars, which is profound. And being Parmigiani Fleurier, based on his immense knowledge, restoration has always been the source of knowledge of Michel. He understood deeply and was fascinated by calendars in any form. And in fact, the first calendar beyond the Gregorian calendar, which is the Western time of reading the time, which is a solar calendar, was the Islamic calendar that was originally a table clock that Michel restored in the days, that was miniaturized and became on the wrist. So this way of interpreting the time is what sets civilizations apart, no? Because like a language, you read the time in a different way according to your culture. And you can use the sun, like in the Western world. You can use the moon, like the Muslim world, and you can use the combination of the two in the Catholic calendar that we did. So it depends on what is speaking to you as a culture. And then we don't know really, because it's not easy to have the etymology of why one culture chose the moon, one culture chose the sun. Sometimes you see, even in Western civilizations of the past, that there were calendars that were lunar, but then they disappeared, because at the end you have to have a convention in which you rule the world, your world. And calendars have been much more important in the past. Today we live in cities. We have a life which is set on agendas, but a calendar is much more than that. And our ancestors, the society was ruled by a calendar on the agricultural cycles, on the political agenda, on the religious agenda. So that's why Michel uses this beautiful sentence that summarizes everything, where a calendar mirrors the civilization that made it alive.
Thank you very much. Now, you know, of course, as being Chinese, I'm deeply intrigued by the Chinese calendar. Before we get to that, though, let's talk first about the Islamic calendar, because that watch was extraordinary and was also the recipient of a prize at the Geneva Grand Prix. Right. So in 622, the Prophet Muhammad moves from Mecca to Messina. It's called Hijrah, and the calendar that he created is called Hijri. It's an extraordinary calendar, as it comprises of a 30-year cycle, 11 which are leap years. It also has a pattern for the months as well, and even has a specific month for fasting called Ramadan, right? And it also tells you when you should be doing your pilgrimage as well. In fact, it orders all life. In fact, in calendar systems preceding it, it even told you when you are able to fight and when you're able to not fight, which I always think is incredible, right? They're so respectful to each other based on this calendar system. Tell me about the adventure of Michel Parmigiani and of the brand itself, creating this extraordinary Islamic calendar, which is, for the first time, a perpetual version of it.
Well, it came from Michel's restoration work. So when you have the idea of interpreting another way of reading the time, you're putting your knowledge at the disposal of another culture. And this is Michel's life, because he dedicated his life to perpetuating mechanical art. And when you are a restorer, you are combining a set of skills which is at the top of the industry, because you have to master not only what you craft today, but what was the ages of history that you used to craft. And this beautiful knowledge, which is at the highest, is at the service of another person's work, because you're restoring somebody else's work. So that's where understated comes from. I think the exercise of understanding what a cultural calendar is about is a question of understatement, because first you have to understand. You have to understand what is a different way of reading the time from your own way of reading the time. And then the fascinating part is that everything has to be then translated into components that are micro components that have a tolerance of a couple of micron, and through the mechanic you have to replicate what the time, how the time has been set, and how you want to read it. So it's an exercise of humility, of respect, like restoration is. So that's why the origin, the soul of the cultural knowledge of Michel is then embodied in the calendars. And when you put your immense talent and Swiss watchmaking culture, which UNESCO just named a couple of years ago a human patrimony, at the service of another culture, I think is the best thing that a watchmaker can do in terms of personalizing an object for somebody else.
Thank you very much. Now, Gary, let me ask you a question, sir. I mean, you have been one of the greatest champions of horlogerie through your writing, through your photography, through your collecting, and through your community building. Now, watches like perpetual calendars, like the Chinese calendar, like the Islamic calendar, in some ways are a little bit a dichotomy, a little bit in conflict with the era in which we live in, where all information is so readily available. I mean, if I want to check the difference between a Gregorian calendar and what day it is in the Chinese or Islamic calendar, I could go to Google. Why do you think it's so important for craftsmen to make such an incredible effort to create something mechanical that can achieve this? And what is the beauty in that for you?
Well, I guess I'm put in mind, as you asked the question, of John Kennedy's famous statement, right? We choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. There's an element of that, right? To me, it's a miracle that you can take something, like this fantastic watch, and it's got this little round pendulum thing, and it swings back and forth, and you move your arm. That it keeps time at all is a miracle. Okay, to me, as Guido says, you say we're going to take not just a natural phenomenon, but a cultural phenomenon and set of beliefs about how we should measure our time on Earth and order our affairs, and express that not with a computer chip, but you turn it over and it's gears and levers and springs and stuff, and you say, how the heck did they figure that out? And I think the expression of the creator's interpretation of the world in the form of mechanical art is important, and horology has been recognized as an important, not just craft, but art form in our world. And I think it's important to keep pressing the boundaries of that, and to see what we can do. One of the things that you say fairly often is, we're not at the end yet. Right? People say, well, everything in watchmaking that could have been invented has already been done. I don't believe that's true. You don't believe that's true. And pushing the boundaries back and saying, it is possible to be more thoughtful about timekeeping and about how we make it better and how we make better approximations of our experienced reality, I think is very, very important.
Thank you, Gary. Great answer. Guido, I feel like I need to apologize to you on behalf of my civilization because our calendar is so complicated, right? It's a lunisolar calendar, which means after every 12 months, you need a 13th month to reconcile the sun and the moon. I apologize, sir. On top of that, it's a 60-year cycle, which means it's impossible to make it into a perpetual calendar. And then you have 24 breaths that follow an agricultural pattern, 10 celestial stems that give you the elements, and then 12 earthly branches that give you the zodiac signs as well. It's so confusing, sir. My question for you is the following. Even if I knew nothing about this, when I look at the watch that you created, the Chinese calendar, I was like, wow, that's so damn beautiful. How do you reconcile the idea of giving the maximum information while creating something that's extraordinarily beautiful?
Well, it's true that the Chinese calendar is very complex because it's a combination of lunar and solar, and it's not cyclical. Like a lunar calendar is cyclical, a solar calendar can be perpetual almost, because you know that you have to adapt every 100 years a day, so it's not really perpetual. But the cycle of the Chinese calendar, due to the combination of so many elements, makes it a cycle of 60 years. And it's impossible to have a 60-year cycle on the watch. At least we didn't manage to do it. Maybe somebody else will. But we've broken down in cycles of 12. So the cycles of 12 will be every 12 years. You have to change one component in the movement, only one. And we do that for free the first time. So you have 24 years of continuity in this information. And every year we are going to produce, like a bottle of champagne or like a wine has its millésime. So you have a yearly production done in that year. And you will see on the dial a slightly indication where you see that's the time in which you have to service the watch in 12 years from now. So we have a fixed quantity every year that we will produce in the first part of the year to manage this issue, which is a logistic issue if you want, but that makes you that the millésime, the production of a year is set the year before.
Fantastic. Now, Gary, let me ask you a question, sir. Now, I sometimes imagine my friends, if they were dogs, what kind of dogs would they be? And I feel as if your breed would be the Legato Romagnolo, which is the only dog in the world capable of sensing, smelling, and discovering truffles. because you always seem to get there before everyone else does, right? and so when I look, for example, at independent watchmaking, I mean, okay, you know, it's very trendy and popular now, but I think you were championing independent watchmaking probably since its creation, but certainly for the last 20, even 30 years, right? For you as a collector with such an extraordinary array of collection of beauty, with a collection which I can only imagine is invaluable today, because I know you have many pièces uniques as well. What is it about Parmigiani Fleurier, and specifically their calendar watches, that appeals to you so much? What beauty do you see in them?
Well, you know, from the time I bought my first Parmigiani Fleurier watch 20 years ago, they're elegant, they're sophisticated, they're not for everybody. You know, there's a certain something about them and about the history built, and in common with independent watchmaking overall, in restoration. Right? If you look at Philippe Dufour and you know, we could make a long list, and starting with Michel Parmigiani, an understanding and placing a value on the past and learning from, and in some ways, you know, exhuming from the graveyards the insights about how you solve these difficult problems is, to me, a big part of the inherent fascination of watchmaking. And Parmigiani, throughout its history, has brought that sensibility into its watches. And I think now, with the new offerings over the past few years, has really taken it, in my mind, to another level. You know, the aesthetics are great, the design is great, the simple expression of complex ideas. You know, we look at the new introduction this year of the minute rattrapant, where I say, well, I have 23 minutes till my next meeting. How can I express that in a way that I can kind of peek at it, and I can see, well, the wedge between the hands is this big, and then it's that big, and then I get pretty close. And then maybe I'm a little late, say, well, I'm only a minute late, you know, 2 minutes late. And it's not buzzing at me, it's not beeping at me. It's elegant, it's clear, it's useful. You know, and if I could just go on, come back to the calendar watches, you say, well, how could something, you know, let's say, you know, I live in California, how is you know, a Chinese or Islamic calendar useful to me? And I think it's, you know, useful, and I think of the lucky three who get the set of 3 watches. There's something inherent in the set of watches that it helps me to think for myself about what's important, right? Connecting with other cultures, connecting with other people. That it's not just I can tell time in the way that my tradition tells me, but whether I understand it at first or not, or I can read the characters or not, it's not just that the mechanics are unbelievably you know, complex, fascinating, and they work. It's about mindfulness, right? We're mindful of the passage of time. You said it earlier, right? If you look at the Earth from space, we all have the same lifespan on average, right? Where, you know, the long-term survival rate is still 0, and you know, and yet the connections that we have, the ability to look things up, in some ways have divided us more than they've united us, right? And I think this collection of watches, if people are thoughtful about it, will make them aware and mindful that, you know what, maybe I should learn more about that.
I absolutely love that. You know, one of the things that I appreciate most about our culture, our, I guess, hobby, our obsession, is that it serves to unite people. Horology is an international language that transcends race, religion, gender. It unites everyone. And what I love about what you said, Gary, is that when you talk about Chinese calendar, which is lunisolar, it's about the observation of the heavenly bodies, for example. The same thing with the Islamic calendar, it's a lunar calendar, so it's about the new moon rising. When we talk about the Gregorian calendar, it's about the earth, the solar year, and about the overage that it creates. Guido, for you, why are these watches so important in terms of uniting humanity? I'm sorry to get too deep.
Well, before I answer that, I want to build on what you said, because the fact that we did a set was already a cultural exercise, because you had to choose the material. Why platinum? I can't do a pink gold Islamic calendar for obvious reasons, because in the Islamic culture, Men, according to the Quran, shouldn't be adorning themselves with and should be humble in the way that they appear. So this is part of what their religion is. That's why the gold has not to be yellow or pink. And the small detail of the Aventurine moon that you have on the 3 calendars, if you look at the Hijri calendars, it's in white gold. It's not in pink gold like the other 2. So there are 2 nuances, and the platinum is the material that is the most noble material in the industry, in nature, I would say, the most prestigious, yet the most understated. So very Parmigiani in a certain way. And this is also neutral in terms of cultural background. So when you do choices that are putting together the trilogy, which is, we are the only brand who expresses 3 calendars at the same time, you have to do it in a way which is respectful not only of the single relationship that you have with one culture, but also amongst the culture that you're showcasing together. And we did only 3 because we have 3 calendars, 3 ways of interpreting, 3 sets for 3 fortunate collectors. So going back to your question, why is so important the fact to interpret these cultures, is a way of showing a true inclusivity, if you want. No, everybody talks about inclusivity, but I think inclusivity, first of all, is respect. I treat you as peer, and I like to understand you, and so I put all my heart, all my skills in doing that. And we as watchmakers can do that only by interpreting mechanically, through the mechanics, what is the way of reading the time. So that's, for me, is the highest thing that you can do. It's not a commercial exercise. This doesn't change our numbers, okay? But that's luxury, because luxury is not about how much money you make, how much money you show. It's an expression of excellence. It's an expression of moving forward. I mean, the industry has always looked back in the last 3 decades, but luxury is about evolving excellence through your heritage, through your tradition, through your skills. But those skills, if they're not bringing you in a better place than before, they're not really useful. I'm not interested in replicating the way that we did watches 50, 60, 300 years ago. So that is a way of putting at the service. We are a brand projected to the future, and we try to do that in a way which is respectful of the cultural heritage and of the people that we want to serve.
Could I just hop on that for a second? And I've shared this with you previously. I saw Guido speak on a panel a number of years ago, and someone asked the question, why among young people are vintage watches popular? And I thought you said one of the greatest things. You said, well, in the 1950s, people generally believed that the future would be better than the past. And the tragedy today is that many, particularly young people, believe the future will be worse than the past. And what you've just said to me, it shows a hopefulness. Right, it shows that you're still thinking the future is better than the past, and that you and Parmigiani are going to make the contribution that you're able to ensuring that that's the case.
Well, it's our responsibility. You can't blame if the future is worse than the past if you're not doing something to make it better. Okay, so you have to invest yourself. And this is more a Western way of thinking, because if you speak to a young Chinese, if you speak to people who are in the emerging market, they still think the opposite, that the future will be better. So it depends on where you are culturally coming from, and that's the beauty of being different in the world.
Well, this offers a good segue. I do feel as if you've moved reassuringly into the future, and you're one of those brands that is unabashed and bold about that. Guido, you've created an incredible new design language for Parmigiani Fleurier while retaining all of its wonderful values. You've created a very keen and beautiful focus, as Gary said, on discrete complication. And actually, we could have used the minute rattrapant, because now it says 3 minutes and 28 seconds. If all 3 of us had it, we would know exactly how much time we had left.
Exactly.
But for what I'm going to take this opportunity, because for what you achieved, I want to give you this award. This is the 2022 award for Revolution's CEO of the Year. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a nice.
Bravo. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my friend.
My pleasure, sir. And maybe we'll just see if there are any questions from the audience. Are there any questions? If not, I'm going to ask Gary, perhaps, a last conclusive remark. You were talking about how young people are enchanted by vintage watches. A young person 50 years from now, what do you think he's going to think of Parmigiani Fleurier at this very moment and the watches being created by Guido in collaboration with Michel Parmigiani?
I think they're going to have enduring value, right? I think they're built for the long run. I think, as you said and you say in your intent, right, they're designed in such a way that they're not fad watches, they're not hype watches, they're watches for people of discerning taste. And I think that from the early, the fluting of the early toric watches, retained in a subtle way now, and updated, modernized, but made in a way timeless. I think that 50 years from now, people will look at these watches and say, those are watches that I would still be proud to own and proud to wear.
Thank you very much. And Guido, when you are designing, what is your hope for the future? When your children are your age, for example, and they're looking at one of the watches you create, what do you think will be the reflections of them and their generation about what you've created?
I think the most important value in a person is courage, because it allows you to have integrity, it allows you to stand by your ideas. And I think creativity, first of all, is a mindset. So you have to have the courage to ask yourself, what can I do differently? What can I do in with singularity? I don't want to. I stopped benchmarking competition 15 years ago, because that is the wrong question to ask. Because if you ask what are the others are selling, first of all, you're already late, and second, they are selling. It's not your job. So you really have to dive into your introspective world, your brand, your values, your client, and try to interpret that in your own way. And this is the same for people. Okay, so you treat a brand like you treat a person. You can't be pulled by the jacket everywhere. So that's what I would love to see, that brands really are finding their singularity and stop looking around doing the same stuff.
Well, you certainly achieved that. Gary Getz, thank you so much. Guido Terreni, thank you so much.
Thank you, Wade.
Sir, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we conclude.
Thank you. Pleasure.